do not teach products to your students. Teach principles. Principles of security, principles of database, principles of networking. Do not teach Cisco networking. Do not teach Microsoft Office. Do not teach that. If you're going to teach something, teach how to use an Office product to run your business better, and then you can use any Office product. And for the people that say to me, we have to teach these products because that's what people are using in the real world, I say to you, you're teaching students who can do brain surgery, create bridges, build buildings. They're smart enough to do that, but they're too stupid to be able to pick up a book on Microsoft Office and learn how to use it in a single day. You can't have it both ways. They're either smart or they're stupid. And so, I don't think that this bill is perfect. Very little is. I think that a lot could be done by forming that committee and working forward to creating a basis where New Hampshire could be looked at as an element, as a central point for the training of free software in the whole United States. And we could actually make money off of it. From my viewpoint, there's only two things that New Hampshire makes: maple syrup and software. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of sending a lot of money to Redmond, Washington, to Silicon Valley for software that our people could make. And there's only so much maple syrup that Bill Gates can drink. With that, thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Are there any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Hall.
And I would be happy to work with your committee if you want to.
Rep. 72 will be scheduled. Yes, Representative Schramm.
You just answered my question.
Thank you. Okay. Christopher Wade. Members, could you shut your mics off unless you're actually speaking? Please turn your mic on.
Okay, so it's red. It's on. Okay. So yeah, I'm Christopher Wade. I'm a resident of Keene, New Hampshire. I am also CEO of a technology company that deals with free software, and specifically with hardware. But I have a lot of experience in this, basically, and supporting, especially in the past, more in the past, but recent past, but companies doing migrations to free software. And I can say that it is actually cheaper to migrate to free software, the overall costs anyway, even if there is an investment cost. So it's, I was a little concerned about some of the testimony here today because it was just inaccurate and misleading and manipulative. But one of the things I actually have a concern about this bill is that these IT people, they know how to work around a lot of these sorts of bills, and that they will put in specific feature requests that they know only one particular application can fill. But one of the benefits of free software is you can actually add functionality yourself if you want to. So it kind of is, it's very disingenuous to say, well, we have to go with this particular application, proprietary application, if you can also add that same feature to a free software application and then avoid those licensing costs. Now, that doesn't mean that the free software is automatically going to be the solution that's that you're going to want. Like sometimes you're just going to want to go a certain route, and because over the long haul, it's going to be the best route, right? So let me bring up. We'll just go here. I'll say some more stuff here. So one of the other things I want to point out is that free software really doesn't have anything to do with the costs. You want to invest in free software development rather than spending money or sending money to Washington, D.C. We've already got companies we had a really solid technology industry 20 plus years ago in New Hampshire, and we lost out because we didn't take the right steps. And this is an opportunity to fix and correct those things. New Hampshire is still a very good place to do software development technology. And we've actually been attracting over the last decade or so a lot of small companies back to New Hampshire, and most of them are dealing with free software development. So it's something that you should consider as well, because it will end up with money going into the pockets of our citizens as opposed to citizens over in Washington. All right, let's see. All right. So I think the major thing, though, honestly, about this bill is it actually improves the security situation. So what people don't understand is that Microsoft uses free software, right? Like Microsoft actually moved to using Linux as part of its system, and Linux is free software, right? So because of the security implications and the dangers of proprietary, I don't know if people remember, but anybody who's using Windows, a couple decades, like 20 years ago, viruses, constant virus. Linux doesn't even have antivirus software for it because it actually fixes the bugs, as opposed to Windows, where you have to wait for bug fixes from Microsoft that never get fixed, and then you need antivirus software as a result. But of course, the antivirus software doesn't even work. But they don't usually tell you that. It's just kind of your only option. So one of the things else I want to point out is that I thought it was pretty ingenious to bring up the vulnerability with Java here recently. That sort of vulnerability, it's going to happen in any software, regardless of whether the sources are available for it or not. They actually happen way more frequently in the proprietary software, and unfortunately, we're unable to fix those bugs. We are relying on other companies. Most of the time, those bugs don't get fixed. Now, I thought it was interesting that John here brought up the router situation, because that's one of the things I'm actually an expert in. Did you know that almost all routers on the market today are full of holes and problems? There's like 1 in 10 that you can get that actually isn't problematic. So, and the funny thing about this is most of those are based on free software, but the holes are not in the free software, they're in the proprietary components that you're relying on to run on top generally. And in order to fix them, you actually have to revert to a completely free system. So, because the manufacturers themselves they don't put out the fixes. The fixes exist, but they only exist in the free versions. Now, if the companies actually support their product properly, which proprietary software developers generally don't, then those bugs, those problems, those exploits wouldn't be exploitable. So this is one of these problems with proprietary software companies. If the company that you are buying the software from doesn't fix the problem, you can't fix it yourself either. So one of the other things I want to point out is proprietary software often hinders support. So, and it does it in many, many different ways. In one way, if it's like a piece of hardware, say you bought a printer yesterday and you buy a new computer today with a new operating system, if it's a proprietary operating system, you can't use the printer you bought 6 months ago with that new operating system. With Linux and free software, you can, and the support's not going to just disappear. So there's all sorts of costs that you will find that don't exist in the free software world as you move away, that never get taken into account when you're running the numbers. And I think that's something that's important to mention. So it's not that there's no cost. Again, free software is not about the price. It has nothing to do with price. It has more to do with security and control over the software you're running. Another issue is old file formats. If you are using an old, like for example, I think it was WordPerfect. WordPerfect for a long time was the standard. But try putting a WordPerfect document today. Good luck. You won't be able to. And that's because it's a proprietary format created with a proprietary program. But if you are using a free software format, right, it's a free software program, you wouldn't have these problems. And this is a big problem when you're talking about looking at archival records. So definitely, this is an important bill. I don't think it's like the perfect bill, but it's certainly adequate. It's certainly going to address some of the issues that we have. So I think one of the important things to bring up are migration costs. Migration costs are actually fairly small in the scheme of things. There is a migration cost, but what people have to remember is there's always a migration cost from one version to the next. When you're running Windows 7 and you go to upgrade to Windows 8, now it's a particularly good example because the user interface changed drastically. That had significant migration costs in user training, okay? At that point in time when that was going on, I remember I was supporting both Windows users and I was supporting Linux users. When we moved people to Linux Mint, I didn't have any training to do. I didn't have to teach them anything. They just picked it up on their own because you didn't have those drastic changes. But with Windows, you did. So it really depends on like what versions of software people are moving from to determine how expensive it actually is. But the training costs actually aren't necessarily that great because oftentimes the user interfaces are very similar between Windows and Linux or free and non-free software. Now there are sometimes differences, like Apple is a pretty different user interface than Windows, but between say Linux, which is usually what people think about when they think about free software, it's actually frequently almost identical. So there's not this huge learning or teaching or educational cost that is being disingenuously suggested. And like I said, I have experience with this, so I know. I deal with some of the largest companies in the world actually in supporting mostly at these days with hardware, but basically I'm the leading expert basically in the world on this. So, all right. So most of the cybersecurity risks are actually impacting proprietary software. The control chains, Microsoft, as we were saying before, Microsoft and other proprietary software companies actually use free software. So any argument that you have like this free software is somehow less secure, well, you're already using it. It's not, and the reason it's not is because I'll give you an example. Debian is a version of Linux, and Debian, in order to get your source code into Debian, you have to do what's called submitting a patch, right? And a patch basically changes the software. But not anybody can submit a patch. Not anybody can contribute to Debian. You can submit a patch, and Debian will accept or deny your patch. And over time, as you become trusted, just like maybe an employee within a company, you will then be given more and more ability to submit patches, maybe without additional review. That doesn't mean there's nobody reviewing it. There is, but it's not just automatically occurring.
Excuse me, it seems that you're getting very much into the weeds on how free software operates. Could you stick to what's relevant to this particular bill?
I think we're talking about the heart of it, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so the other thing is proprietary software can't be audited. Free software can be audited. That's another thing. Whenever you start talking about, especially security, and security is the heart of this bill, you're unable to audit proprietary software. So there's no way to know whether or not it's secure or not. When you talk about encryption is usually where it comes up with. If you don't have the source code, there's no point in talking about security. There's no way to tell. I mean, you might be able to exploit it, but you're not going to be able to do a proper audit. All right, one last thing. So there was an exploit here recently, or I'm sorry, they were talking about an exploit that happened with some of our municipalities here, and that had to do with Bitcoin, basically. And I want to point out that that's actually a social engineering problem, not a problem with the security of the software. It had nothing to do with proprietary software or free software. Cybersecurity training is also, I think, a misleading way to phrase things because, it doesn't have to do with technology at all. It has to do with people being social engineered. It's fraud. And people need to be aware whether somebody's calling you on the phone trying to get you to wire money, or they're trying to get you to buy Bitcoin on the internet. It's a social engineering problem, not a cybersecurity issue. Okay? You have any questions?
Bill Sizer.
Mr. Wade, I'm watching a brawl here among the...
Microphone's on.
It's going. Thank you. I'm watching a brawl here between experts, and I don't know who to believe. You may have your own action running, meaning you don't like Windows, maybe I believe it, but I'm wondering whether there's some evangelism going on here. But I just want to make a remark for you. What's ringing in my ears are this meeting and something like that when we started the testimony. And the gentleman, the commissioner, we've known him a long time. I don't think that those words fit. Please be careful because you probably have some good things to say, like buy your router out, Mr. Hardware. But
not here to sell you anything.
I just caution you that just wasn't a welcome thing to hear.
Well, I think people should be aware that sometimes people have their own interests, and
We're well aware of
Yeah.
people presenting their own interests.
yeah.
It's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Thank you for your testimony. Josh Coffin.
Madam Chair, if I could just request that when people come up to testify, that they, A, identify themselves, that they have an unusual name, perhaps you could spell their name so that we can get that information down correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Schmidt. In this case, Mr. Coffin's name is spelled exactly as you would think.
Yep, like the thing they bury you in. Maybe not. That's my last name. Good morning, everyone. I'll start out by explaining who I am. I've been using free and open source software since 1996, and I'm a computer security researcher, so I deal with everything. Let's see, let's start. If we look at last year, most of the vulnerabilities that were exploited in the wild, and let me clarify what that means. When something is exploited in the wild, it's something that nobody knows about, and people are exploiting it. So it's a 0-day vulnerability, hasn't been fixed yet. Most of them are with proprietary software. For example, last year, the Microsoft mail server had like a major vulnerability, and the fix was the FBI hacked into all of them and fixed it for you because that's part of Microsoft's guarantee. You wouldn't get that with free and open source software because it would have already been fixed. Let's see, I'm not really the best at this. My notes are kind of scattered. If we look at the 90s, I don't know if anybody remembers Microsoft Encarta. It was an encyclopedia program. And in the 90s, if somebody told you, oh, there's going to be this, online encyclopedia and anybody can contribute to it, nobody would believe you. But we're all using that right now. It's called Wikipedia. That's a free and open source system. I don't know about you. I haven't seen a Microsoft Encarta this for a very long time. Let's see. Another thing in the proprietary software world, antiviruses and viruses were created by the same company. If that's not a great business model. We don't see this in the free software and open source software world. Let's see. I think hardware obsolescence was mentioned. So in the free and open source software world, we can continue to use the same hardware for decades if we really want, as long as it doesn't fail us. Unfortunately, with Microsoft Windows, every time they come out with a newer release, certain hardware isn't able to be used anymore, and that includes printers, computers, etc. So a lot of that ends up going to landfills, where we could actually just not have to buy new systems. There's considerable cost to buying a new computer every couple of years. I think everybody can agree with that. Let's see. Somebody else had already mentioned social engineering. It is the weakest link. You can have the highest security in the world, and you can break into a company because you convince somebody that you are somebody you're not. It's not that difficult. And then I guess for my, my last point, I just kind of wanted to bring something in perspective. So there was a computer security conference that happened at the end of December. One of the talks, this woman, she talked about her profession. Her profession, and she's a tech dominatrix. What that means? Yep. Yeah, I
That's
laughed about
getting
it.
way off topic, if you don't mind.
Well, that's fair that you can say that, but can you let me finish, please? So, anyway, I'm going to just briefly mention about this person. Her tech dominatrix job is to hack into people's computers with their permission, take over the system, and lock them out. And apparently that's part of the game, I guess. Anyway, during her question and answer session, none of her customers are running free and open source software. They're all running proprietary software. They're all running Microsoft's Windows, they're all running Apple. Like these are, I don't know if anybody's actually tried breaking into a computer professionally, but the proprietary stuff is usually a lot easier to do that with because the holes have not been fixed. And that's my last comment.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Not seeing any. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on House Bill 1273? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and open the hearing on House Bill 1581.
If you're still here,
All representatives.
the argument
You're going to introduce it?
the argument is
Yes, thank you.
free software has no incentive to scam people because
So that was
it's
the
free,
log testimony
whereas
of
paid
the previous
programs,
bill.
non-open
Some
source
of it applies to
programs,
this one.
have incentive to make it difficult, so you keep buying that product
I will read my
or create
testimony
viruses for the
short,
antivirus software.
page, but I think it will answer some questions and maybe summarize a lot of what was said previously. So Chairwoman McGuire, members of the ED&A committee, thank you for the opportunity to introduce HB 1581 relative to the use of open source software by state agency. This bill aims to reinstate the requirement for state agencies to consider open source when acquiring software. So what does it mean for software to be open source? Open source software is analogous to a vehicle manufacturer providing repair manuals and schematics for the inner workings of the vehicle. Such information allows the owner of the vehicle to make any repairs or modifications as necessary. But even more importantly, it allows them to shop around for a mechanic, knowing that the mechanic will have the information they need to make the repair. Closed source software or proprietary software, on the other hand, is analogous to a vehicle manufacturer who does not provide repair manuals and instead only allows you to bring the vehicle to their own repair shop. This kind of vendor lock-in with proprietary software can lead to higher prices as the vendor no longer needs to compete, limited interoperability with other software, especially with a competitor's product, and expensive or unavailable customization. In 2012, considering the same issues with proprietary software, the legislature passed this exact bill, HB 418, adding a requirement that agencies consider open source when it can be a cost-effective alternative. Unfortunately, 6 years later, an omnibus IT restructuring bill, HB 1622, relative to organization of the Department of Information Technology, removed this requirement. The committee report at the time also stated nothing about this change and exclusively focused on the personnel hierarchy of the new IT department. Open source gives our government more agency to manage its software, saves tax dollars over the long run, and maximizes transparency and access to government. The federal government also provides support to agencies considering open source software via the website code.gov. Then please vote to pass on this bipartisan legislation. Thank you for your consideration, and I'll take any questions.
Representative Schmidt.
Just going to the same subcommittee.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Representative Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, in this bill, you've essentially replaced technology with software. So I'm wondering, is it really your intent to remove from statute that the IT department should be used for consultation and to help with decisions about hardware, about computers, networking equipment, phones, all sorts of other things?
So to answer your question, the goal of my bill was just to bring it back to the way it was before 2018. And in that language, they had software. So, and if you were to change it to technology to include hardware, you're now going beyond open source software. You're now going to open hardware, which is also a valid thing, but is a lot
less common. There's not a lot of open source hardware out in the world. So the reason for that is because if we are going to require the government to at least consider open source software, then the language has to be software, and that's why it's software as opposed to technology.
Thank you.
Other questions? Saying none, thank you, Representative Reising. Representative Gallagher.
So, hi again, it's Eric Gallagher, here to testify to the representatives on bill on open source software. So, he and I came up with the ideas for our bills completely independently from one another. I hear about his until it was already filed, so I think the fact that we've got people in both parties thinking about this issue independently shows that there's a wide range of support for it. So I essentially see his bill as a milder version of my own bill. It only addresses the procurement part and only talks about the consideration rather than making a requirement. So my bill had its own procurement portion in it. So I'm not exactly sure how the two of our bills would interact if both of them passed, but I am perfectly willing to rip the procurement section out of my own bill and replace it with Representative Berejny's if that's what's necessary to harmonize the two of them. That's if both of them pass. If only one of them can pass, I mean, I prefer it would be mine, but if it can't be mine, then it'd be good if
Thank
it
you.
is going to pass.
We'll consider that in the subcommittee, whether
Okay.
either or both of these should pass in what form.
Okay. So, I support his too. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay.
Jeffrey Picard.
My name is Jeffrey Picard. I was born and raised in New Hampshire, graduated from Goffstown High School and from UNH with a degree in math. I also own and operate a small business in New Hampshire. I've been a software engineer professionally for about the past 10 years, and during my time in that field, I've had to make a lot of decisions about what software products to use for various projects. In my experience, with very few exceptions, open source solutions work better, they are cheaper and easier to find support for and to maintain. For these reasons, I think it would benefit our government to use more open source software, and I support this bill.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes or no?
For the subcommittee,
Yes.
are you available for the subcommittee?
Yes.
Check.
Okay, we'll let you know when it's scheduled. John Hall.
I promise to be brief. I would support this bill except for one thing. It states open source software instead of free software. And I want to make very, very clear why this is important. Open source software is good for the companies, it's good for the developers, because it brings together software that's written by many people that can help them create a product. But there is no requirement in the licensing of that software to pass on their changes to the end user. And you folks are the end user. You are. And so if there's open source software that's on your systems, you're not guaranteed to have the changes that the developer made to them. If that developer goes out of business, then you can't fix it. If that developer loses interest in that video graphics card, or they lose interest in the printer mechanism that you have, you can't fix it, and you can't hire anybody to fix it because they don't know how to fix it. So free software is very important from a longevity standpoint, and that's what you need to remember. Also, open hardware is very important, because without the hardware being specified in an open fashion with all of the hardware intricacies exposed, free software people cannot give it the type of support that you would like to have. And there are companies who produce open hardware. We should help them. We should encourage them to do that so that your printers, your modems, your everything can survive long into the future, because somebody has a source code for that other than the developer themselves. And if you say to yourselves, this is why we buy our hardware and software from large companies that will never go out of business, then I have only one word to say to you: DEC. Or Kodak, or Enron, or any one of the other large companies that went out of business so fast it made your head spin. Do you have any questions?
I don't see any. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Hall. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on House Bill 1581? Okay, I don't see anyone, so I'm closing the hearing. And we will resume at 1:15.
Madam Chair, may we know which of your subcommittees these bills are for?
Representative Yakubovic.
Thank you.
What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. I know it might have been hard to hear. Probably still is hard to hear. But I don't know about you, but John McAfee taught me that when he sold the company, he was telling everyone that he was creating the viruses. He admitted that he created the viruses just so his antivirus software could be sold. It worked. He made billions. But all right, guys, I'm gonna head out here. I might be live in a little bit again too, so peace out.
Are we streaming that?